Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. As Christina said, I'm from the Danish Authority for Social Services and Housing, and that's where the building regulations in Denmark is placed. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the new agreement on climate declarations and limit values that was achieved this spring. With the intention of having it in the legislation from July 1st, 2025. So the intention was to accelerate the green transition in the building sector, primarily by doing these things that are listed on the page here, by tightening the limit value, by making more differentiated limit values for different building types, and for kind of like including more building types in the calculations. We also found the need to exempt certain types of socially critical building types because they have so much CO2 emissions or need for that, and it's really difficult to change a waterwork, for instance, that needs to be made out of concrete. But to achieve all of this, we also have started a revision of the building regulations in order to find this clash that could be between the climate requirements and the other requirements in the building code. So we have identified that we need to look at health, we need to look at the safety requirements in order to see if some of these levels are too high. Is there something we need to adjust? So I'm just going to go through them quite fast. Each of these levels, we have introduced a new limit value, or are introducing new limit value. The original one that are in the building regulations now is at 12 kilograms CO2 equivalent per square meter per year. So when we introduce an average limit value at 7.1, it's quite ambitious. It's quite a big step down. We also have indications that this means that about 75% of all the buildings that are erected before the limit values was introduced would have problems living up to this limit value. Or in other words, 85% needs to do something else to live up to the requirements. Only 15% have done calculations or the climate declarations that was below the limit value. And we also have a low emission class that are a way of making the building industry build to a more ambitious level than what we have indicated. And we have adjusted that as well because now the limit values goes very close down to the low emission class. So when we say that more new construction are covered by the LCA requirement, it means that at the moment we have only the buildings that are covered by the EPC or they have to make an energy label, but that only accounts for about 57% of all the new construction in Denmark. That's at least our data. So we expand that. We include holiday homes, summer houses. We include some of the unheated buildings like parking buildings, storage buildings, unheated storage buildings, but not the unheated buildings below 50 square meters. We also include extensions to buildings. That has not been included at the moment. So if you have an extension to an apartment building or to an office building, institution, stuff like that, then you will be in this requirement. You have to fill up this requirement. We also have this requirement for extensions to single-family houses, terraced houses, stuff like that, but only for very large extensions. And we also introduced this this exemption. We have identified some building types that should not have a limit value, so we exempt them completely. And examples from that is waterworks, as I said, prisons, and some of the armed forces buildings, the operational buildings and hospitals. Yes. And we also expand the scope to the building process. So we include the construction process in the limit value. And we introduced that by having the A4, A5 module in the requirements, which we didn't have before. We have some indications that if we set the limit value for the construction process at 1.5, it corresponds roughly to that half of the building sites needs to perform better. I think it's important to say that this is an independent limit value. So you have to fulfill the limit value for the building process at 1.5, but you also have to live up to the limit value for the building itself, and you cannot kind of like borrow from one to the other. You need to fulfill both of them. Yes. So this is our new values. The overall average is on the top, and down there is the limit values that we introduce in 2025, and the anticipated limit values for the next steps in 27, 29. So there's a roadmap in this. We introduce our anticipation for what the limit value should be in 2 years and in 4 years. The low emission class that we are using is actually the 2029 column. So if you want to build something for the future, now you can use the column to the right. Then you build for what we anticipate to have as a requirement in 2029. We believe this will lead to a change in the way that we build. It must happen that way. We have 85% of the buildings that was erected in the past that would be above the limit value. So there has to be some sort of change to how we build. So this figure is just a rough estimate of what we believe. We have tried to divide these into 4 categories, and this is our best guess. So the upper part is the ones that has to do nothing else. They have already fulfilled the limit value by the construction that they had. The next one is the ones that has to do small optimizations. They have to find between 0 and 2 kilogram CO2 equivalent per square meter per year. So we call that small optimizations. I don't know if it's correct, but that's what we call it now. And the next one is the partly changed practices, where the building should find between 2 and 4 kilograms CO2 equivalent per square meter per year. We need to do a lot in a building to reduce 3 or 4 kilograms CO2 equivalent per square meter per year. And the last 13%, we call that totally changed practices. We need to find more than 4 kilograms CO2 equivalent per square meter per year. This is just an estimation, and the way we divide it is something that we have done, but not really. We don't have any real analysis to back these partitions up. Why is it just above 4 or whatever? We have to look into that. But it's just to give an indication that, well, we need to do something, and I don't know, maybe 45% have to actually change something in how they build. Maybe the ones that are smaller optimizations can actually just tweak it by finding the right brick or choosing another flooring or whatever. But this is quite important to know. Yes. So this is the idea for what we are going to do on the revision of the building regulations. That we have to look at all this, the whole circle. We need to look at the technical requirement for the safety, for the health, for the energy consumption, and see if there's a clashes between that. Something we need to adjust to be able to facilitate that the climate regulations could proceed. We also have to look at the technical requirements for renovation in order to make sure that it's actually possible to adapt a building or to fulfill the requirements or change how a building is used, to be able to use the existing building stock in a better way. And this is some of the most important parts in this. There's also, of course, use of digital processes and tools. That's really important to facilitate as well. So, just to have a little bit of talk about what we learned when we introduced limit values in Denmark and what we found necessary to do to be able to apply this requirement in the Danish building code. First of all, the standard that we used is really, really good, but it has never been written in a way that it was supposed to be national requirements. This was a standard written to be used if you want to do a LCA requirement in some way, or an LCA calculation. You want to show you have a product or you have a building that leads out that much emissions, but it has never been written in a way that it should be a foundation for a national requirement in building code. So you need to kind of like tweak it, or you need to make simplifications, or you need to make more precise description of what you do in the individual modules. So when we look at our requirement now, we found that we did have quite a lot of clarifications that we needed to do. For instance, which stages should we include, and which modules do we include? How do we include the modules? Do we just take them as they are in the standard, or do we actually kind of like tweak them and say, this part of the module we don't have to calculate, or in this part of the module you can use this standard value, or in some cases maybe you have to use this standard value. We also have had quite a long discussions on how to address floor area. We have a principle that if you have a climate emission for materials or something in a building, you need to have a square meters, because otherwise you only have one, either on the top or the down of the unit. So you need to have something kilogram CO2 equivalent, but you also have to have the square meters, because otherwise the unit doesn't really make sense. So how to address area, because a building is of course the heated area, but it's also maybe a garage or a carport, or maybe you have a small unheated storage room with very simple constructions. That's part of the building as well. So all that you need to address, in our opinion at least. You also need to have a sort of a generic database for construction materials. You need to have a way of, if you don't have an EPD, how do you address it in other ways? You also need to describe, or we believe that you need to describe what is included in the building modeling quite precisely. We have 750 lines of a building model, Oh, I need to speed up a little bit. You also need to have a list of how the lifetimes of products and constructions are, and you also need to address the changing energy systems. Just one slide more. When you set the limit values, it's really important that you know the data behind what is being built. You need to have cases or a data at least to show what is actually being built. You need to have some cases that are representative, and you need to collect that data. And when you do that, we showed at least that there was differentiation between building types. So you need to have kind of like for single-family houses, you have one level, and it's easier to fulfill. So if you want to have a equally difficult limit value, you need to differentiate between them. We also need to address how to have mixed-use buildings, at least if you have differentiated CO2 requirements. And then, just last point, you need to address how to build special buildings. There are certain buildings that, to be able to fulfill their function, the purpose, they need to use certain constructions, and they will emit CO2. So you can, for instance, think of a concert hall. You need to have a very large room that maybe gives some limitations on how to build. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niels. Do we have any questions here? One question, and the microphone, please. Where do we have the microphone?
Yeah.
No, please.
It's for the online, I think.
Okay, thanks. In my opinion, there is one building type missing in the targets.
Yes.
Meaning logistics.
Logistics building.
How is your thinking around? It's many square meters. We develop a lot of logistics, but it's not covered in the targets.
Well, we simplify the lines. Actually, it's in the office buildings. I think storage buildings is in that as well. So logistics buildings will be there.
Okay.
We will, when we do the regulations in Denmark, we will be more precise on where the different types of buildings go into the categories. Yeah.
Okay, because it's possible to go much lower on logistics.
Probably, yeah. We still have a lot to learn, I would say. Yeah.
Maria from Finland. So you did a couple of years ago, you did a roadmap for the limiting values.
Yes.
Are you aligned with that roadmap done previously with your new limiting values?
No. We are way below that. Yeah.
Thank you.
The original limit value identified in the roadmap was 10.5, and then we tweaked some of the background data. So if we would have followed the same line or the same roadmap, it should have been 9.9, and now it's 7.1. So we're quite a lot below that. Yeah.
Peter Vangsbo from Arup. What is the projection for infrastructure projects, station buildings?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not. It's another department or another ministry, so I can't answer that.
Okay, I think we need to proceed, and we can have more discussions after lunch. So thank you very much, Niels, for this presentation. And we will now have a presentation from Ingunn Marton about the regulation in Norway.
Thank you. My name is Ingunn, and I'm from the Norwegian Building Authority, and I will talk about experience from decided and coming climate regulation in Norway. First of all, I guess you don't know the Norwegian requirements, but here there are. It's a greenhouse gas emissions calculation for building. It's just a calculation, no limit values, and it's for apartment and commercial buildings. And we have a Norwegian standard written here, so that the method is going. They have to use the method. And as a minimum, it should include A1 to A4, B2 and B4, as you can see down there what it is, and then the building elements, the And in addition to this, we have the construction waste must be included in the greenhouse gas. And the building elements is pile foundation, direct foundation, load-bearing systems, external walls, internal walls, slabs, and roof. This regulation was in place July 1st, 2022, and it was 1 year of transitional period. So actually, it was from July 1st, 2023, it came in place, and the building industry started to use this. And since then, we haven't had so many buildings that has been finished since then. And this is it has to be completed when the building gets the certificate of completion. So actually, we don't know very much how this is solved out there, because there are not that many buildings that have been finished by then. And also, we are not collecting these calculations. They can be shown if we ask for supervision. So, sorry to say, we don't have that much experience to tell to you still, but we will. But I will ask or tell you more about what we are working with. And we have been working with a climate partnership. And this report, the knowledge base for the construction industry, was launched in June this year. And the partners are now discussing the content in the partnership. And I think they will tell us about this in the late of September. And it's the government by the Minister of Local Government and Regional Development, and the NHO, the Federation of Norwegian Construction Industries, and Fellesforbundet, the United Federation of Trade Unions, that are discussing this. So we are waiting very much to see what this climate partnership will be. I'll show you something in this, what to do in this knowledge base. First of all, we try to find when are the gas emission coming, and who are deciding the greenhouse gas emissions, and who is involved. So this is an illustration. You can see the green one here, the big bump there, is illustrating when can we get the greenhouse gases down, and then the brown one, you see when is the greenhouse gases coming. And so the line above there is telling when, and under there is the decision makers, and then last one there, when is the decision you do when they're planning, when are they coming? Because when I decide, or someone decide when the greenhouse gases decision coming, it will come later on. We also try to illustrate where are the greenhouse gases from, and this is just an illustration. It's not correct the size of this. It's just an illustration. So you can see the blue one on the top there is EU, and then down is the rest of the world, and the rest of the one is in Norway. And this the green one on top is the primary energy. There are some greenhouse gases from that, and then there's some from the industry, some from the energy, and then from the building construction industry, and then from services, and then from transportation. So we can see there is a lot of greenhouse gases that's outside the construction industry, and it's a lot outside Norway. We also try to find the total climate footprint from buildings and construction in Norway, and we got this one. And as you can see, it's building materials and import of building materials. That's a lot of greenhouse gases from that. And then the blue one on the bottom there is the other imports. There's a lot of import into Norway. And then it's not that much from transportation and direct emissions and direct energy use and indirect energy use, but there are some. But import is actually the biggest climate gas emissions. So this one, you can download both these reports if you want to. It's in Norwegian though. Then I'll go on and tell you about what are we going to do now. We have get a task from the ministry to see possible climate requirements in the regulations. And we are now investigating how to set climate requirements. But there are a lot of difficulties on the way to set some of that. First of all, we thought we want to see how this zero alternative is. I'll go back to that. And then we look into validation of LCA tools. In Norway, we don't have a tool. They can use all kind of tools on the market. And also, this standard needs a guidance to how to calculate. And we had a lot of challenges. The calculation methodology. We have access to EPDs. And what should we include? What kind of building elements? What kind of modules? And also going into the energy performance of building directive. That will tell us maybe how to do this and are we on track with that one. A little about the zero alternative. We are looking into the consequence analysis of the zero alternative and its effects on greenhouse gas emissions in the construction sector. So no change in today's building regulation, what will happen then? And then we evaluate how other regulations, measures, and actually will influence the climate footprint of buildings. And we'll get the final report in the end of September. We have seen a draft of this report, and most of it will say is the price of the CO2 emissions. If that gets very high, it will got a lot of influence on the greenhouse gas emissions from the industry, the construction industry, of course. This is the most, But there are also other things they're into, but we'll see what the report says. Then we have got into the validation of LCA tools. We launched this report in 2023, where we calculated the greenhouse gases with different calculation tools, and we found out they were calculated very different. We tried to see what this is. Why is it I calculating different? And we think it is transport distances and transport emissions. They are calculating lifetime different, replacement different, and they're using generic values different. Now we are conducting test calculation for 5 different LCA tools, and I'll show you the results from 4 of them. We have given them the EPDs or told them to use generic values, and we have said that you have to take the quantities from the BIM models or the IFC files. And we see the first 4 is generic values, and we can understand why they are not the same, but you can see for EPDs also there's a lot of differences in how they calculate this. So we need to harmonize these tools, and we work with that now. And as you can see, we have a big challenge there, because now if you want to calculate for EPD concrete here, I would take the green one, of course, because that makes a lot less CO2 emissions than the light blue one. But I don't think they should have the same value. So we need to get this in place. And now we are giving them these tools a new task where we are giving them the quantities. They're not going to take the quantities from the BIM model, because we thought that was maybe a problem, or it's a problem. They are finding different quantities from the BIM model. That's kind of interesting, I think. I'm not a data expert, so I think it's different. But we have gotten just a few with the calculation in now, and they are looking better, but they are not the same. And just to tell, this is A1 to A3. If we would include the whole lifespan, it would be a lot more different than this. So we have a challenge there. But we are working on it. And we also the construction industry are looking into this standard. And they are developing a guide, and we are into that, working with them on this, on how to calculate maintenance intervals and technical lifetimes, transport distances, and vehicles and load factors, and energy, and construction site, waste amounts, and construction equipments, and end of life. So this will also help us, we think, with the LCA tools, will be more harmonized, but it's not enough to get this guidance. I'm pretty sure about that. So we are going on. When we are going, I think we're going to get some limit values someday, but we have to get this in place first. So that was what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Ingunn. And do we have any question to Ingunn? Yeah, and you will get the microphone.
Thanks for the presentation, Mikko from Finland. Have you looked into the flexibility needs of different building types? I mean, there's a concern that if you guide just with limit values, you are minimizing the material, but maybe the life cycle length of the building could be endangered, and of course also like the flexibility needs, like the so-called circular economy of buildings and spaces. I mean that office buildings need more flexibility than for example, apartment buildings, and the lease contract lengths in office buildings are going down and going shorter and shorter, which means that they must be renewed in like in 3 or 4 years after the initial construction. So this also affects like the limit values, so that you don't enhance building type that just minimizes the first construction material needs and not the life cycle needs. If you understood the question.
I think you did. Of course, this is a problem when you just get rid of good materials that can live for a longer time. But when we do this calculation, we use standard values for lifetimes. So this is what we're discussing, and this is what's been discussing in the standard, or the guidance to the standard too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we need to continue, and we save the question to the afternoon.
Okay.
And thank you very much, Ingunn. So I will talk about the experiences from the decided regulation in Sweden. We have had this regulation in place since January 22. And this regulation applies to new buildings. And it is the developer who is responsible to register a climate declaration at the Boverket, national authority, before they can get final clearance from the municipality. So meaning that they need to declare as built on the climate impact. And they need to declare the climate impact from all the construction products in the building's envelope, load-bearing structures, and interior walls. The regulation is limited to the modules A1 to A5, and they need to declare it kilograms carbon dioxide equivalents per gross floor area. So this is the introduction of this new regulation in Sweden from 22. And as you see, it's not the full life cycle, it's not the full building, but the starting point was to start a learning process in the construction sector. Start to calculate as a first step. And still, this is a limitation. We think it is limited to parts that has the greatest climate impact, and this is in the Swedish context, as you see in the figure on the side. So in this way, we thought this is an introduction of rules that are reasonable, And we know that it takes a lot of time to collect data. So to make it easier, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises, but also to get good quality on the calculations, we said that the state is responsible to keep an updated generic climate database. From the first beginning, it was said that this regulation should be able to build on with limit values later. Of course, we got a lot of comments from the Swedish industry, so it was quite important to give a roadmap on what is the next step of this regulation. So we had a governmental assignment on this, and 2020 we gave this roadmap to the government, and this was sent for consultation. And I think that one, together with this, the first regulation, and with the roadmap on the next step, I think this was quite very well accepted in the Swedish industry. And we also got the governmental assignment to give a legal proposal on limit values, and the report was given to the government last year in May. So I would say with this as a background, so you know what type of regulation that has been introduced, I would say it's been quite well received with this roadmap and legal proposal. Of course, we have those who are in the front. It's going too slowly and it's not too ambitious. But we have, from the beginning, had in mind how does the small and medium-sized companies will be affected of this regulation. So we need to balance this, to have the forefront pushing for this, but how does it affect these small and medium-sized companies? So I would say this is something that has been important for us, and I think that we now get this acceptance. Well, maybe this was it's a big task anyway for the industry to start calculating on these parts. And the construction of the regulation, I would say perhaps this differs a bit between the Nordic countries. We have introduced a separate set of regulation with climate declarations in Sweden. So this is not part of the building code. So we have a completely new law, ordinance and provision. So it's not part of this process on where you apply for the building code and you need to fulfill the other requirements. So this separate legislation only about climate declaration. So that's the background also, that when you submit this climate declaration, it is to a national authority. It's not on a local level, on a municipality level. So it is to Boverket they will submit this. And we therefore have this national register. We have an IT service, the use, to submit this climate declaration. And also we have a national supervision. This is not on a local level. So we have the responsibility to perform supervision on this. So in this way, we have introduced a regulation where the state can follow the outcome of this regulation quite closely, since it's collected in one place. And we have also particular sanctions to this regulation. It's not part of the building code. So I think perhaps this is a bit different and explains why we have this register, for example. So with that said, we know that this new regulation, there's a lot of questions from the industry. So I think that's something that we think worked well. We had a communication strategy for 3 years. How can we introduce this complex task, LCA words, to the construction sector? So we have this digital handbook where we have all the guidance on application of the regulation. It's not a cookbook on exactly on how to make calculation, but we need to be clear what is included and what is not included. So we have everything gathered in this place. Easy to find, even though sometimes we did comments, where is this handbook when they're in middle, because it's digital and you don't print it. But here we have the database, we have the IT service for registration of the climate declaration, and all the frequent questions and answers we also put in this. So this is much used and appreciated, and we get a lot of comments. We don't understand how do you mean, and so on. And we try to keep this updated and spend quite a lot of time on this to have illustrations and easy explanation and not too much. So I would say this is something that has really worked well. Another one is this climate database from Boverket. I think that has also worked very well. This database with generic data, if they use that, it must come from this database. And today we have more than 200 resources for construction products, but also for energy and fuel. And we have some conservative values for the construction products. And the main reason is that you should not benefit if you use generic data. So it is those products on the market with, say, the highest climate impact. And we wanted to encourage the developers to request EPDs. We could not put that in the legislation, but also to manufacturers to produce more EPDs. And I would say that this has really been this effect we see in Sweden. Today, everyone knows what an EPD is in the construction sector. And we did this development in collaboration with the Ministry of our Environment in Finland. And we keep this on annual updates or when it's necessary. So, as I said, the EPDs have really increased in the market since the introduction of this database. And we get a lot of comments from manufacturers. They want their products also to be representative in this generic database. Another thing that I think worked well, we have an e-learning in this handbook. It's a completely new legislation, as I said, and it's not easy to start reading from all these pages. So this gives a quick introduction on this regulation. And this has also been much used and appreciated. So you start there and then you can be guided through and go in to look closer to if you have some detailed questions. And when it comes to Boverket's control of climate declaration, it is the municipality who check that there is a registered climate declaration at Boverket. That is their task, and this is in the Plan and Building Act. But otherwise, it's up to us to check that the data in the climate declaration complies with this regulation. And we have the plan to control around 10% of this registered climate declaration on a yearly basis. And we can request the calculation basis. They need to use the template when they register the climate declaration, but you haven't have all the data there. So we need to have this calculation basis, but also verification, so we can make this control. And we ask for two types of verifications. Did you really buy this product that you claimed if you used this product with low climate impact? Did you really buy that? And did you put it into the building? What quantities and units did you use? But also, if you use specific data, climate data, EPDs, they also need to say that because they are guilty for 5 years, so maybe they will not be able to have this. So what data they use, they need to verify that also. So here is from our register some statistics. We expected it to be, when we started up to build up this register and planning for our supervision, we expected that we would have already 4,000 declarations. But as you can see, the red line, it is those declarations that we have received so far. We think that there were quite a few who sent in building permits before this legislation came into place. But also, according to the crisis in the construction sector, there's a decrease of construction projects. But also, it takes quite a long time to build. So it was those who applied for building permit in January 2022. So they're not already constructed. And some other interesting statistic is that we have noticed that they have quite surprisingly low declared values in our register. And here you can see the different values for different building types. And perhaps the single family houses are more closer to the reference values that we have. So this is something we're going to look closer to. What is the background? Is it really true? Is this trustworthy information? And so I won't forget it. We know there's a lot of interest of this data, and we have plans to publish an English webpage with these statistics also. We have it in Swedish, but it will come also similar in English. I think this is one of the maybe explanation on why we might see this low climate impact. How do you handle reporting of the data gaps? If you don't have all the products that you should have according to this regulation, then of course you have lower climate impact. And to try to explain this, how do you clear these data gaps? You need to say how much of these products you have in your calculation. So 91 to 100, that means 100%, you have 100% of exactly all the products in the building's envelope and the load-bearing structures and inner walls. And we don't think they have 100%. We know it's quite costly to collect exactly all data, screws, everything, all the small details is included into this. But we don't know, so maybe it's more reasonable that you're around 70-80%, and they need to calculate so it's representative to 100%. So maybe this is the explanation. We don't know. We're going to look closer into this. With that said, some conclusions from our supervision. This is really a big learning process for a lot of stakeholders. Almost everything is new for us as a supervision authority as well, and for the industry. And as I said, we've seen quite low climate impact. Is this true? Can you trust this information? We have also noticed when we build up our supervision that there's potential to streamline a lot within our work with climate declaration. And we also see the need of have a template for the calculation basis. And we have proposed in the next step of this regulation, when we introduce limit values, they also need to send in this calculation basis, all data from start. So we think this is really important in the next step of this regulation. So for us, the focus now in our supervision is that they follow this regulation. We see it's not followed fully. Previously, we have been working more on a guided supervision. We want them to understand this regulation. We understand it's not easy to understand how this should work. But we will now go in to sharpen our supervision from now on and see that this is followed. And this is something that's important when you introduce limit values. So with that said, this is some of our experiences in Sweden. I put some links here if you're interested in this in English, but also these reports, roadmaps, if you're interested in the next step of regulation. And with that said, we are going to have a short break now. I think we have 10 minutes before we're going to hear from the industry what they have for kind of experiences. Yeah, well, maybe one question. Okay. Okay, thank you. Then we have a break, 10 minutes.